Hello, good morning. This is such a fun, bumpy start, Ian. It's going great, don't worry, this is awesome. My very first presentation that I gave as a student was about my termite research, and it was a competitive talk. Have you ever done a competitive talk? Right? It's like as nerdy as it gets, right? So this was at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I did termite research at Northeastern University as an undergrad to understand how societies lived in the healthiest way possible. I was pre-med, but only because my father told me to be, and I quickly realized that I wasn't in that for myself. And so I spoke with my teachers, and I had a really inspiring teacher, Becky Rosengaus. She was a new hire, a kind of fun Latina from Mexico, and she would say, "I work with termites." I said, "What is that?" Termites. And we would study how their behavioral defenses against disease help their societies be the healthiest that they could be without doctors, hospitals, nurses, and pharmacies. I wanted to know how they were so healthy and what lessons we humans could learn from termites. And so I did a whole project about their behavior, and the video at the conference showing their behavior didn't work. And I needed to win. I didn't know the rules of this game. I wasn't going to run off stage. So I acted it out. And the behaviors were how they defended themselves against disease. I identified in my project 3 new behaviors never before seen in the termite world, which were called scratching. I'm acting it out. Vibratory body shaking. Right? And the third one was called abdominal tip raising. So it was kind of like this. Right? I didn't win. But that gave me a really good start in how I could communicate my science, maybe through the art of dancing, right? But you need all sorts of arts in order to communicate what the hell we're doing as scientists. And I wanted to start my slides today, not so much by my termite abdominal tip raising impression, which I don't think won any votes here, really, just a couple laughs, not for the right reason. But so much telling you a bit of a story that 2 weeks ago in my life, I, for the first time ever, won a fellowship/grant. Thank you. It's only been my entire life in the making. It was through the Global Good Fund, and that's a nonprofit that is aimed at helping social entrepreneurs. So if any of you are doing anything related to business, you're trying to do something for the social good around the world, check out globalgoodfund.org. They're now accepting applicants for their 2020 class. I'm not a paid spokesperson. It's just a great opportunity and something I actually got. So I started the Best Bees Company as a means to raise research funding for bees. Clearly I moved from termites to bees. I was worried that my termite research was killing things, right? It was like pest control. It had a pest control spin to it. I didn't like that. And I thought, what can I save? So with working on bee immunology, there's a life-saving spin to it. So that's what I wanted to do. At the Global Good Fund Gala and Summit in DC 2 weeks ago, I actually had something else on my mind. And it was that I was launching bees into space that very same day. So I'm at the conference, same thing as you are, and I have the video, the live feed on YouTube of the rocket. The bees are going into space, literally that morning. It was 9:30 a.m. launch time. That was like right now, you're doing the opening things, and I'm so distracted. And I'm looking at the empty seat next to me underneath the curtain, and I'm thinking, what's happening? Is it going to explode? Are they okay? What's happening with the bees? I couldn't be there at the launch site in Texas with Blue Origin because I had to be at this conference, right? I was so grateful to get this grant. And so I was distracted. And after the launch happened, it only took 10 minutes. 3 minutes up, 3 minutes in suborbital space, and 3 minutes back down. Quick launch. I wanted to talk about it. And I started telling people, I just launched bees into space. It wasn't landing with people. I was too weird. Right? I could not communicate what I was doing, right? And maybe you hearing it now too, you're like, what? This guy just said the weirdest things in the first 10 minutes. So let me restart, okay? 2 weeks ago, I launched bees into space. Here's what I'm doing more literally. I'm showing you some images, right, of the actual rocket ship that I put bees on that we launched into space. When you can see some connection to the words that this weird man is saying, right, you feel a little bit more involved. This was when the rocket shot the capsule with the experiments off into two. The rocket had a little baby. And the experiments then had its own parachute, and they just floated down somewhere in Texas for my team to spend the next 6 hours finding in the desert of West Texas. Okay? There were over 30 experiments on there, and the real purpose of this with Jeff Bezos of Amazon, he has Blue Origin as his rocket company compared to Elon Musk of his rocket company, Tesla and SpaceX. There's a space race. And they're planning on reusing these rockets, as you well know, but nothing's happening on them as they're going up and coming straight down. This is the rocket as it landed. Nothing's happening. So they've opened it up to students, really with my team at MIT, to say, what do you guys want to do with it? And if I could have a maestro hit the play button on this slide, if possible, we'll keep the volume down a little bit, and it's okay if this doesn't work. There you go. So this is going to play in the background. This is kind of what the hell we're doing here. Now, communicating art through science is vital to my work because I couldn't even explain to you what we were trying to do on the rocket ship if I tried. You can turn the volume down a little bit. It's a weird, our lab at MIT is called Mediated Matter, and it's led by Neri Oxman, and I'm a research affiliate. So this affiliation with groups like the MIT Media Lab, if you're not familiar with the Media Lab, I encourage you to check them out. Media, right? Arts, sciences. It's actually the program in Media, Arts, and Sciences is what it's called at MIT. It's maybe the top secret group there. And this is where they get funding from private companies to provide funding to any scientists and artists who want to do crazy things. So our team, who made this video of what's called the Synthetic Apiary, they are not scientists. They're not beekeepers. They are artists, designers, and architects. And they envision a future of living architecture. So think about climate change. Of course, everything that we discussed last night, it's so important. We get this. But what are we going to do with it? How do we inspire people? Science, in my view, inspires people to ask more questions. Art, that's, debatable, and we'll have a panel up next, but I think that's also to evoke something, perhaps, right? Art need not a purpose, but I think they both combine in getting people to observe, feel, think, and ask together. That's the overlap. Beyond that, our teams have nothing in common. So this Synthetic Apiary project happened in 2015 in an empty warehouse in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We moved 8 beehives inside during the winter with nothing real. Everything was artificial. It was even painted to look like a Stanley Kubrick movie inside, where the bees were fed with artificial food. We had artificial light to project the sun's movement across the sky. The walls were made of cloth, so you actually walked into them. We couldn't really see the walls. And what we were able to discover was that life happened anyways. Bees gave birth to new bees in this artificial environment where perhaps one could imagine what happens when the climate is gone. What happens when we're forced into space? What happens when we live on the moon and we need agriculture, right? The climate is something that we need to take with us. Right? No matter where we live, whether it's underground, in a bubble, on a planet, on the space station, on Earth, we need a climate. And so it's really important to understand this. It's okay if it changes, maybe not, but we need to start talking about this in all senses of it. And we need to start incorporating all aspects of art so that it's an inclusive conversation. Because when I started talking about termites, and talking about space, I know I really didn't have much of your attention here. And I know that you still don't know what the hell we're doing here, and that's kind of where we're at too, right? Scientists and artists coming together to explore what this is going to look like when we have to create artificial environments. What we do at the Best Bees Company and with MIT is we work with bees. And I do think, just like we talked about last night, this is such a big issue, and it's almost too big for anybody to make a difference with climate change. So the avenue that I take with it is to get beehives. Whether you're your own beekeeper, whether you hire a beekeeping service, or you open up your property to another beekeeper, and if those beehives are connected to data, whether it's through a nonprofit called the Bee Informed Partnership, where you're recording bee losses, or whether it's through our partnership with NASA, every beehive that we install with the Best Bees Company, we collect data from, and we report that data to NASA. with their New England Food Security Program. So every beehive is a NASA data point. We're now turning gardens at your home, rooftops across 14 cities into NASA data points to collect data about climate change, pollinator health, food systems. This is a little way to connect people with data, with the Internet of Things. We also work with artists. We have a full-time artist on staff since 2015, Paige Mulhern. This is some of her work. She's a beekeeper. She's our creative director, and she helped us start an intern program with Mass Art. We've also had RISD interns, and what they do is they work with us to do exactly as we're doing over here. This is something that's really important to communicate. Science, bees, feelings, connections. One of our brand pillars is inclusive innovation, and so part of what we do is mural work on beehives. We've even done beehives that can match people's homes. This is one special order from Beacon Hill in Boston, where the client bought a vacant parcel of land for $3 million in Beacon Hill, because she just didn't want any development on it. And she put one beehive on there to match the aesthetic of Beacon Hill. Now, as difficult as clients can be, she didn't like it and rejected it, and she said, just make it gray. So now we use this as a showpiece. But it's an example of how artists can add value to the human experience through storytelling, through evoking something. And that something can absolutely be a connection to climate change and a way to empower everybody, individuals of all ages and abilities, and companies alike, to not just get some bees, but to connect those bees with data, and to connect people and companies to NASA to really make an impact. So this actually helped us to scale too. How do we get our message across? Well, we do that at scale through doing projects. This was in Martha Stewart Living in April 2017, featuring myself as well as Paige Mulhern. This is the two of us looking very homestead-like, even though we're both gay. So that was one way to scale. When you do projects like this, people notice. And when people notice, they talk, and that's the scale that at least my team needs to get our message across. And our message is you can be empowered with climate change by connecting your property with a data point through NASA. What's also amazing too is that when we've done this, we've now started to shift what art means. So it's not just photography, it's not just videos, and it's not just illustration, as Paige identifies as an illustrator. But now this is Paige as kind of a model for photography. So art in context is what I want to bring up here. When you think about the artist doing her work, you can photograph that into a different sort of story. And you can build on that context when you even then have artists who are living in real life, IRL as the millennials call it, doing sculptures, like this interactive. This was called Festooning the Inflatable Beehive, a great work by Maria Meltani and Colette Aliman. You can go inside this inflatable beehive, and it was portable across cities. Right? So you're understanding to meet the artist, to know the story, to interact with the work at scale. This even goes international now. So this was an amazing project out of Oslo, I believe. The Oslo Bee Highway. We're going back one. This is a better photo. This is on rooftops. This is kind of an encapsulated pollinator highway at rooftops all throughout Oslo. So people could understand through art where the bees are going, where the monarch butterflies are going, where all the other pollinators are. And then to extend that to an interactive component here on the bottom left, where that can open up and there's a beehive and a beekeeper inside. So it's interactive art almost. It's like a play in a sort of way. You can engage with so many types of art. This was through illustrating for our book, which was The Bee in Natural History through Princeton. This is the waggle dance of bees. That'll be my next talk for you. I'll get to kind of waggle like a bee instead of shaking my ass like a termite. Infographics, of course, have been key for us, how to communicate our data, showing that beehives in urban areas make more honey. This is, as the jar is bigger, the honey production on average of urban beehives is larger than beehives in the middle and the suburban, and the least honey production in rural beehives. We communicate that through art in a way that I couldn't do with a boring bar graph. People are not as engaged. Here's what we're up to now. We look at honey samples, and this was the TEDx Provincetown talk, and we're understanding in one sample of honey all the plant DNA through a genomic test called called honey DNA. So we can give you a whole readout of all the pollinator plants that your bees are going to, and that informs you and anyone around the world what to actually plant to help save bees, right? To help improve your climate resilience against natural disasters, to understand, like our project in Puerto Rico, what plants were there in honey's DNA before Hurricane Maria versus after Hurricane Maria. And we found a list of which plants came back first, and it seems to be mostly native plants. So this is a whole list from anybody's little beehive data factory of what plants to plant to improve resiliency against climate change. But I couldn't communicate that on my own. I needed art. And so Paige's illustrations on the left show here's a pine tree, or on the right, rose. Right? We're seeing interesting plants. This is what I combined with Paige. This is our black and white handout of my own honey over 5 seasons. So it shows how they change. Whoops, I almost fell off the stage. So linden, pine, and apple, these are the top species found per sample, how they change over time. We really need to partner up with art and science to engage and inspire and scale this together. We then, in closing, have brought this back down to earth a little bit, looking at spaces for beehives around cities. So on the left with Chicago's public libraries, or on the right with Denver's urban gardens. These are open lands where people can sponsor a beehive. We're not doing this program right now, but this is something anybody can do to open this up. To look at templates for an abandoned parcel of land, like here in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, to add art, to communicate what that will look like once we change that to pollinator habitat. We've done this with many different sites already, and what we've actually ended up doing, this is a project from 2016, is we've made these into for-profit urban farms for people who live in their own communities. Because social equity is something that nobody really talks about, right? Look at us, we're a bunch of white people in a room talking about climate change, right? Just addressing that, because it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can give people equity to have access, not only to change their own local environments, but to connect them to the Internet of Things, to produce data, and for everybody to be a NASA data point to measure climate change together. So in closing, back to space. Right, here's the capsule that we launched. This is something that we photographed in a very thoughtful way because we don't know how to talk about this yet. So I invite any of you who have suggestions on how I can tell people more about bees in space without people thinking I'm a wackadoodle, right, to let me know. This is the last play button I'll invite the maestro to hit here. This is the actual video we just received from the capsule. What we've done, and you can lower the volume a little bit, again, it's a weird volume here. We partner up with another lab called Opera of the Future at the Media Lab. We have 2 capsules here. This is actually when bees were in 0G microgravity. What we notice is that bees are not flying around in space just floating, right? What we did was give them honeycomb to stay on, and the queen on each side, we actually had 2 replicates here. The queen is marked in green. The bees stayed on the queen. They retained their society, their social nature. They protected the queen the whole time. They never floated around, and they stayed put as a group. It's really fascinating. So now our next step is to look at queen's fertility. We're doing sperm viability studies, so space sperm we've just brought this talk to today. And we're also going to be breeding space bees, because these are actually the healthiest ones from the USDA's genetic lines. We're making this accessible to all, and this is another way to include social equity in the climate change narrative through art and science. So thank you guys so much for your attention. I just want to leave off with a couple quotes here for World Bee Day, which is coming up on May 20th. So get your social media ready for World Bee Day. It's a thing, right? So what World Bee Day means to us, if you look at Best Bees on Instagram, we'll have a bunch of our direct quotes, like Sam Schloman on the right, who's one of our regional staff members. Let's refocus our mental and political energies on this mission to save the bees and build a sustainable future. It's a tangible part that anybody can do. Thank you.
Well, we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Sure. Question it up, yeah.
Do you know how the bees that went into space will react in a normal climate? Relative to as well?
Yeah, so how will the bees in space react to a normal climate? It's really interesting. So this was the 3rd time in human history that we've sent bees into space. The other 2 were by NASA in the 80s. And each time, including ours, the bees that went to space have outperformed the control bees that stayed on Earth. which is really weird. So we have 5 queens in total. There were 3 who remained in Texas. And of the 5, the 2 that went to space are building bigger, stronger colonies. This is the same thing we saw when the colonies were built in space in the 80s. Without gravity to direct the construction of honeycomb down on Earth. Gravity is a constraint. The bees in space built in all different directions, and they built bigger hives. So if our homes were in space, you could build your bedroom up there, and your garage over there. You could build in all different directions. That's one of them. But so far, their health seems to be improved, and we don't know why yet.
But the relationship, say, I need you to become more aggressive.
Nope, they're all gentle, vegan, bred for all of these great traits by the USDA. It's kind of this top secret government bee, the healthiest bee that we would send up there. Yeah, not aggressive. Yeah.
I have a question with regard to what you were referring to as outperformance, because outperformance in this case, could it not also be just related to a reaction towards trauma, in the sense that you're seeing these bees converge on the queen in space because it's an environment they're not familiar with, and then perhaps also it depends on a human gauge. What we look at outperformance is based on human wants and needs relative to what an insect may actually look at as a life or a value for their own existence.
I love this comment. May I ask, are you an artist?
I'm an economist.
Economist. Okay, so this is also part of the MIT Media Lab's approach called anti-disciplinarian. So, I'm a biologist and then interdisciplinary, right? We can work as an economist and a biologist, that's interdisciplinary. Anti-disciplinary is a term I'd like to introduce here in the vocabulary if we haven't already. We are people, period. Right? I'm Noah, right? Yes, I do these other things, and we can work together, but that doesn't matter what title you put on me. These are ideas and approaches and perspectives. So in terms of science and what we're measuring, a scientist would say, okay, this is what's normal. This is the normal retinue of what bees should do. But there's so much bias there implicitly because I'm a human and I'm a scientist asking that. So we need to understand different perspectives. Research from the Media Lab has shown that more diverse teams, this study was for men and women, so it can ask you which team outperformed the other, a team of all men or a team of all women? This is a fun approach. And it's a trick question. Dare you to answer.
Neither.
A blended team performed 41% better in terms of their productivity measures between men and women versus just all men and all women. And they've done other studies with other types of diversity, but this perspective issue is so important, and I really appreciate your comment. I will add one thing. There happened to be another group from Arizona, Hillary, that had put bees into space on the same rocket ship. And they did have some death. Some of those bees did float around. They did not have that natural beeswax for the bees to hold on to. And so it was an interesting comparison there. So we did have that sense of outperformance or of a B2B comparison in a way. So there's so much more to look into, and I really invite each of you to continue the conversation with me. More perspectives are better.
Any other questions for Noah? Yes, Doctor. Let me give you Mike.
I can project. What do the space bees eat?
What do the space bees eat? Well, we could have no liquids on the rocket ship. So boring, I know. So we coated a little bit of honey all throughout the capsule. And if you look closely at some of the videos, and you can look this up, this project website is called Maiden Flight, like a maiden voyage. So there's a project website there. You can see closely some of the vibration of the honey in that capsule. But in general, for the synthetic apiary in prior times when bees were in space, they're fed artificials like sugar water. They could be fed honey, but there's some tight restrictions on liquids up there. They can also be fed fondant. You can get it from a bakery. Beekeepers will feed their bees in the wintertime fondant. We try to avoid giving bees a liquid feed in the winter so it doesn't freeze up. But bees eat sugar, yeah.